Second question that a lot of customers have, what should be our level of analysis? Should I use a very organizational level? In other words, we'll just kind of randomly sample our customers or employees, get feedback, and then make decisions? Or should we go very granular and let's find out when a customer has a problem, which employee was responsible for that problem? You know, which teller out of the 1,000 you have in the organization? Which telephone rep out of the 1,000,000 you have in the organization? So the point is, you have to decide after not only what you measure, but the level of granularity that you want to measure. And that really depends on your objective. If you're doing a lot of training programs with frontline people, then you want a very granular level. If you're just trying to decide what determines customer loyalty and engagement, you can keep a broader one. So again, you have to sit down and think of what granularity level do I want, and for my purposes in training programs, and do I want to tie it back to the specific people that caused the pain? A couple of points. There's a lot of organizations in the measuring will measure quantitative data without qualitative data. Let me make this point. Always measure qualitative data with your quantitative data. Because if you measure specific items that are quantitative on a 1 to 5 scale, you don't know the depth or the broadness or the richness of that variable and why people responded. So we always say measure qualitative data at the same time you're measuring quantitative data. So when you measure qualitative data, make sure you do a couple things. Make sure that you measure it in a way that people will look at it. We go into companies and they have databases of qualitative responses, 10,000 verbatim responses. And what do you do with all that? And what we find is if you measure it and just measure it in bulk, no one will ever use it. And it won't be very valuable because your employees get burnout just going through that data. So what we suggest is that you do is you bucketize that data, and what we like to do in technology is make it in a way so that we turn it into quantitative data. That is, we'll take verbatim comments, bucketize them into a certain category, and then tell you the frequency or use of that data. Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? What are the 5 top responses you're getting in qualitative insights from your customers? And that is all real time and given to you very quickly. And that's something that we need to be better at in this country in looking at qualitative data, is making it into a quantitative variable so that it's used more often. Now, we talked about measuring customer engagement, employee engagement. Let's talk about managing, because the honest truth is everyone measures. You can go out and find pieces on the web or technology on the web that measure. You can go find organizations that will charge you $1 million to measure or $100,000 to measure. But the reality is they all do one thing, they measure data. It's just how much you want to spend. But the real question is, what do you do with all that data once you get it? And I know if you're listening to this or seeing this video, it's coming to your mind, yeah, what do we do? In fact, what most CEOs will tell us as we go in and we analyze where they're at is we got all this data, so what? What does it mean? What do we do with it? So the key, if you're going to be into enterprise feedback, is not measuring, because you can get a lot of people to measure. It's how you manage the data. And that's what I want to spend the time on today. So you start collecting the data, and the first thing you probably do is you get descriptive statistics. Now, descriptive statistics, that's things on measuring, and it gives you you get the mean level 1 to 5 on a variable. So I've got some data in front of me, and what's typical is companies will ask customers things like, do you trust the company's the representatives to behave with fairness and integrity? This organization gives me control of my finances and future. So this data we gathered was from a financial institution. And people responded on this from a 1 to 5. I can trust the financial advice I get from this organization. So the first thing we usually do is we go look at all this data that comes in, and we look at the descriptive nature of it. And the data that has the higher mean level, we say we're doing well at, unless it's a negative coded, right? And the items that we do low at, we say that's where we have the problem. So the data I'm looking at here is the mean level that's lowest in all this responses. I can trust the financial advice I get from this organization. So immediately this organization is saying, we've got to get better advice, we're not very trustworthy, we've got real problems. But there's one thing about descriptive statistics you should know, and you should always remember this. And here's the lesson. That there are 3 types of lies in the universe, and that is lies, damn lies, and descriptive statistics. The fact is, if we look at just descriptive statistics, whether the mean level is high or low in the data that you're gathering, and take action on it, we may be doing absolutely the wrong thing. And I'll give you some examples. We were doing consulting in Texas for a very high-end restaurant. And in that restaurant, they gathered data, and they asked us to come in and look at that data after they gathered it to make some sense out of it. And the area that they did worst on is our pricing of our restaurant, of our food, is perceived to be high, and people said strongly agree. And so the restaurant, they wanted to get higher revenue, so they said, okay, if we decrease the price of our normal plate, from $35 to $25, we'll increase the volume, we'll make more money. And I said, well, how are you basing that data on? They said, well, here's an item that says it was the lowest mean level of the data we collected that we are charging, that we're perceived to be a high-end restaurant, and that our prices are high. And so the question is, yes, you're a high-end restaurant, and of course at high-end restaurants your prices are high. But do you know the real information relative to everyone else? That is, other restaurants that are high-end restaurant, is your price high? They said, well, we don't know the answer to that. So again, gathering data, but gathering the right data is important, and not using descriptive statistics to decide on whether you have the right answer or where you should spend your resources. So what they did was we went out and did analysis and found out relative to all the high-end restaurants, they were perceived to be the lowest price. And that the right answer, not using the descriptive statistics, but the right answer was to increase the price of their plates at the restaurants. And they did, and their revenue increased it, and their profit margins. And so sometimes we have to be very careful how we look at descriptive statistics, because we don't know if they correlate with the items that are most important. That is, just because you do low in a given area doesn't mean that that it's related or correlates with what's really important, customer engagement. Just because customers see you maybe not as trustworthy in the advice you give, what if compared to all the other financial institutions, you are the highest provider of trustworthy financial advice? But it's just basically consumers don't trust banks to give financial advice. So again, we have to know about descriptive statistics and whether it moves the needle. What I mean by whether it moves the needle is that if we increase that level, give greater trustworthy advice or graded advice, increase the performance of that advice, will customer engagement increase or not, and will profitability of the institution increase? That's the question, not whether the mean level is high or low. So, what do I suggest? If we're not going to use descriptive statistics, what should we be using? And the answer is we should be using leading indicators. And what I mean by leading indicators, for years, customer confidence is measured in this country, and we go out and do polls, and the Dow Jones goes up or down depending on consumers, whether they think they're going to open their wallets or not. But yet inside our organization, we don't even think about leading indicators. We don't measure things like customer engagement and link it to profitability, or we don't measure things like customer satisfaction. And we're not good at linking whether customer satisfaction goes up or down. Does our profitability go up or down? That's the real question. And whether things we do in our organization have impact on outcomes of the organization, or whether they're not hot. When we mean not hot, meaning they're not correlated with anything that goes on that's important to the organization. One of the problems we have in marketing and HR is that we spend our time on descriptive statistics, and we don't spend our time on showing that a movement in that variable will cause an increase in profitability, and therefore we have no credibility. So, leading indicators are important, and leading indicators of many organizations are things such as turnover intentions inside the organization, service quality, productivity of your employees, or on the outside, maybe the amount of trust they feel in your organization, the amount that they promote. And we want to watch those things on a continuous basis to see whether they go up or down, just like the stock market. And as we start monitoring those things on a continuous basis, we're going to understand their correlation, their link to profitability and outcomes. And we're going to be able to react much quicker and be proactive in our organization.